Hello, welcome to the From Way Downtown Pacers podcast. I am IndyStar Pacers editor Nat Newell here, of course, with our beat writer Dustin Dopiriak. The last time we did this, I believe, was right after the Charlotte loss. We went through what was wrong with the Pacers. Uh, Clearly, the Pacers front office, Rick Carlisle, listened to the podcast.
Obviously, they do always.
Did everything you said because it's been a
Yes.
total change recently here. So I want to start with a little game. It'll be on a scale of 1 to 10. This is based on your expectations coming into the season. So in other words, if you thought they were a 50-win team this year, then that's what we're basing this on. Everything is based. So like we'll get to it, but the last 10 games is not a high number necessarily because you thought they would be most of the way there at the beginning of the season. But let's start with up till the last podcast, which again was the inexplicable Charlotte loss. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being completely inconceivable to 10 being inconceivably bad, 10 being inconceivably good. Up to the Charlotte game on that scale, I think I'd give them a 2. I thought that was like probably as bad as they could possibly be, given Charlotte was worse than I thought was possible, but they had some good wins in there. I'm going 2. What's your number on that? Leading up to the Charlotte game.
Yeah, I'm gonna say 3. Because obviously it's subpar. It's not what I expected them to be at all. It's not near what I expected them to be. So well short of 5. There, like, to your point, there were a couple wins in there that you were like, okay, well, they must have something. They must have some clue what they're doing. You had the stretch of Washington, New Orleans, and Portland where it seemed like they got it together. I mean, obviously those are 3 bad teams, but you're like, all right, well, they can at least win games. And even Chicago, you're like, oh, that's them. They had the really good win against the Knicks. They had a good win against the Heat. They had a good win against Dallas. They had a good win against Orlando. They had the overtime win against Boston. And, even the Detroit opener looks better because, that's not a bad Pistons team. I think that's going to be a team that ends up in the play-in. But obviously well short of par, and especially, the games that they lost, certainly a big part of it was injuries. And especially at that point, they guys either weren't back yet or Nembhard was on a minutes restriction. Those sort of things, they were just beginning to figure out life beyond, just leaning into that. There were games that they should have been able to win. I mean, and I do keep, sounding this, banging this drum that, Aaron Nembhard and Andrew Nembhard and Ben Shepherd are all way more important than people give them credit for. But on the flip side of that, even if you're losing all 3 of those guys, you should find a way to get, to make the equation work when you have Haliburton, Siakam, Mathurin, and Turner. And you've had those 4 guys for almost every single game. And again, you can obviously say, well, these are way more important pieces than you think. And I agree. But you're paying, that's $100 million in salary right there. You should be able to figure out, you should be able to put anybody in as the 5th guy with those guys and beat some of the teams they lost to. Not everybody. You're not getting in the playoffs with that, but all the same, you should be able to beat a downtrodden Charlotte team. You should be able to beat Brooklyn when they're missing Cam Thomas and several other guys. Those are wins you should be able to get. So I would put it overall, again, obviously injuries having a lot to do with it. But even so, despite that point, I would put them at a 3, not quite at a 2. Again, there was just enough there to be like, they should be able to figure this out. And so you can't bury them yet. So they've been below expectations, but also they haven't destroyed themselves. They haven't dug a hole so deep that they can't get out of it.
We will get to is Andrew Nembhard the NBA MVP this season later in the podcast. But so the next question, same thing, scale of 1 to 10. Taking in the whole season on a scale of 1 to 10, we're going to get, and then we'll do the last 10 games. Whole season, I think, they're still 500 or a game under 500. I got to give them a 3.5 overall at this point. If you want to go a little higher because of what we've seen the last 10 games, then maybe. But I still think if you take everything in a whole without projecting, I think a 3.5 is as high as I can go.
Yeah, I mean, maybe 4, but that's about it. Yeah, I mean, like obviously, I mean, you're still 16 and 17. You're sub 500. You're at 8th place in the East. I mean, I thought this team could win 50 games. I thought it would still be in the mix with the same group. Obviously, I think the East is shaken up a little bit. It's a little bit different than I expected. I certainly didn't expect Cleveland to be this far out ahead of everybody at this point. I mean, I expected Cleveland to be good. I thought it would be very similar to last year that everybody was jammed, but man, Cleveland has just been remarkable. And obviously Boston's still really good, but I mean, they certainly showed, some weaknesses. I mean, they're only a game up on the Knicks, which is kind of weird. But you have some separation there. But there's, I think, like considering the talent they have, the Pacers should be 5th. The Pacers should be 5th in the East, and they should be right there with Orlando and the Knicks. They shouldn't be far beyond those teams. If you say, okay, well, they were never going to do what Cleveland's doing, they were never going to do what Boston's doing. I agree, but they should be in at least shouting distance to the Knicks. Considering how much the Magic have suffered in terms of injuries, concern with Banchero and Wagner, the Pacers should be right there with them. They should be at least where the Hawks are. Considering all the slow start the Bucks have had, they should be there. Like they should be in a better place. Despite all of this, again, injuries considering still, but I think it's fair to say that if you look at the whole of it, then they should be, then obviously they're still subpar for where they're expected to be this year.
And then we look at the last 10 games. They sweep the West Coast trip, which is really impressive. Those 10 games do include the Charlotte loss. So really looking at the probably the most recent 8 games, the Oklahoma City loss, I think it was the first loss in a month, maybe since the Memphis game, where you said, okay, I get it. But even the Memphis game, they were way up early and then ended up getting hammered. So it wasn't. I mean, it's probably like the only loss they've had this year where you look at it and say, man, okay, I came out of that one not thinking anything different than I went going in or anything. Right. I felt better about them. And then, of course, they get annihilated by the Celtics, but then bounce back with NBA MVP Andrew Nembhard and beat the Celtics. They win the season series against the Celtics. So in the last, whether you want to go 8 games, 10 games, whatever, I still thought winning 7 out of 10 put you on pace for 57 wins. Obviously, some of those are pretty impressive 7 wins. Some of those 7 wins are pretty impressive. I guess I'm going to go a 6.5 on a scale of 10. Again, judging by the fact that I thought they were a 50-win team coming into the season. So where are you at on the last 10 games?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this thing is 2 different scales, judging on it from where you thought it would be at the beginning of the year versus where you think it would be, where you thought it would be at the Charlotte game. I mean, I think probably if you think from where they would be at the beginning of the year, it's maybe a 6.5. If you think about it from where they were at the Charlotte game, it's a 9. It's somewhere in that range, because it's just like when you consider, the shape that they were in, the way that they were playing, and even like, I thought Chicago was a big moment. That they had that shoot around and it was like, hey, this is where we're supposed to play. This is what we're supposed to do. And it was like, oh, that's the team I remember. That's the team that runs fast, that pushes the pace, that scores in the paint, that hits shots, that just and that connects, that looks like a connected bunch of guys and plays, not great, but just enough defense to beat somebody. And then they go out and they get beat again. Like, it's not just they got beat by Charlotte. Like, Charlotte didn't have LaMelo Ball. They didn't have Miles Bridges. They didn't have Mark Williams. I mean, there was a long list. I mean, it's what I can't even remember I can't even pronounce the point guard's name anymore.
There was an argument that the Pacers should have been kicked out of the NBA after losing that game. I'll just leave it at that.
There should have at least been a meeting. It should have been discussed. Relegation should have been at least on somebody's mind at the league office at that point. But no, I mean, so obviously the practices mattered. I mean, they keep pointing this out and just being able to have an opportunity to reset because there's just been so much back and forth. I mean, so much losing guys and bringing guys back. And even, the bringing guys back creates some level of tumult in itself, because it's like, okay, like just as you started to have a group of five starters, 5 backups that were starting to play together as a unit, then you change this again, and like that's what it's kind of constantly been. You lose Nembhard, you bring him back. You lose Shepherd, you bring him back. You You lose Jackson and Wiseman, you sign Moses Brown, he doesn't do anything or much of anything, and then you get Thomas Bryant, and like you're constantly adding to this ecosystem. And I do love Rick's term for this, so I'm going to keep stealing it as much as I can. But you're dealing with all of these shocks to the ecosystem, and they needed something just to settle down and be like, okay, like this is who we are, this is who we're going to be. Just redo stuff, remind yourself what your identity is. And they clearly needed that. But I mean, I thought once they got it to some degree before that Bulls game, I thought that should have been at least enough to carry over to beat, again, a just wrecked Charlotte team at home. That's a game. It's a game they just absolutely should have been able to win. But like taking that kind of hit, but then coming back, obviously it helps to get to pretty easy ones through the NBA Cup, I guess, consolation process or whatever you want to call it. The you didn't make it games you get scheduled. It was nice for them to get hooked up with the 76ers and Pelicans there and take advantage of those guys. Obviously, the Pelicans have just been ravaged by injuries. The Sixers are only slowly getting it back together. Now they've got their main guys back, and they caught both of them at pretty good times to get started. But like it's tough to run the table in a West Coast trip. Like it really is, like when you're coming from, the Eastern time zone, just jet lag, again, multiple games, you're on the road for a week, you're changing time zones, you're moving around, like you're in a different hotel almost every night. Certainly helps you're in Sacramento for 3 days, but like still, that's a lot. And you go Kings, Warriors back to back, and none of those are bad teams. Like obviously the Kings just fired their coach, and like certainly they're not great. But those are tough ones across the board. Those are 3 good teams, and you're going way out west. You've got all that travel that factors in, and to win all 3 of those games, so it was more than I expected. I did not think they were going to run the table out there. Come back, Boston. I mean, that Oklahoma City Boston back-to-back was absolute murder. Like it was as nasty of a back-to-back as you could possibly concoct. But being able to recover from getting trounced the way they did against Boston and come back and be like, well, we get Andrew back, so we're going to beat him. And they did, and that was, again, just showed a lot of mettle in that entire stretch, in that game. Again, like you like for as much as, like you said, like the Oklahoma City game, you're like, hey, that's a team that might win the West. Like those guys are good. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was on an absolute bender, 45 points. He was remarkable. Certainly Haliburton only getting 4 in that game is something that stands out to you as a problem. But for the most part, they played reasonably well collectively, had a pretty good lead, could have won that game. And so you're like, all right, at least they're hanging in there with a Western Conference contender, but you go to Boston, you just get slammed. And like that is a moment where you're like, all right, well, what's wrong with us? Like this is a team we at least battled with, in the playoffs. And, rather than having that thought, they were like, all right, we're going to respond to this. We're going to be way better. And they were. Speaks a lot to them. And I mean, I thought, going in 3-4 was going to be great out of the 7-game stretch that starts with that West Coast trip and ends this, it's brutal post-Christmas stretch of, Oklahoma City, Boston, Milwaukee. I thought if they were able to win 3 games out of that, they had to feel pretty good about themselves. So they've already got 4 and a chance to get 1 more against Milwaukee. I imagine Giannis is probably going to end up playing, but I mean, he had an illness that was enough for him to, have to stay away from the team. So I imagine that sucked. I think whatever bug they've got sounds like it's miserable. So we'll see what that looks like when he gets back on the floor and how diminished a version of Giannis they're going to get. So we'll see there, but still, it's still a, like they're in a better position out of this than I thought they would be.
And is this real? I mean, I'm not saying they're going to beat Boston every time they play them. Obviously, they just split with them. But do you think that they've corrected whatever issues they had, and this is the Pacers team we're going to see, barring injuries, and for most of the rest of the season? I
mean, they're not going to win 70% of their games from here on in. I think they are better. They have moved past a certain stage. I think like that's a point that you could say that like I don't think. I mean, again, provided there aren't more injuries. If they get if Nembhard doesn't have a backslide with his knees, if Nesmith comes back relatively soon, if the Obi Toppin injury isn't a long-term deal, then they're going to be closer to what you remember them being last year. But even last year, they were certainly capable of losing a game that you thought they had no business losing at a really stupid time. I don't think they're going to be incapable of that. And I right now, like even if they're back to full strength, I don't think they're as good as they were last year. Basically, again, part of as full strength as they can be. I mean, like the centers do matter. Jalen, like losing Jalen Smith to free agency mattered. Losing Isaiah Jackson and James Wiseman, these injuries matters. I mean, I think Thomas Bryant has been as good a pickup as you could have asked for somebody that you just had to do a second-round pick swap to get. That basically they were trying to, basically giving away to everybody would take him, and you were the team that you were like, well, we need that actually. And he's been good, so I'm not trying to diminish that. But like their depth is not the same. I think the way I put it in the loss after Boston was this ecosystem is fragile. Like it doesn't have to be missing much for things to go haywire. It doesn't absorb damage particularly well, and that's an issue. Like there are going to be more injuries, and there might not be as long of term as the ones they've dealt with so far, but guys are going to miss with an ankle sprain. Guys are going to miss with, a knee sprain. Guys are going to miss with a sore calf. Guys are going to miss with a sore back. I mean, like there will be, more man games missed this year. They're not going to run the table there. And their inability so far to be able to still concoct a formula that works when they don't have a couple of these guys, this says that, all right, like this ecosystem again has some fragility to it, and in that case, like it is hard to maintain consistency in that case when if you lose another guy, you're a totally different team, and you just cannot summon the same kind of performance as you could if you're missing a guy like if you have a guy like Aaron Nembhard. And so they are going to be better. They're going to be more competitive. They're going to be a playoff team. But right now it's trending towards. You might have to win a play-in game. If not, you're going to be lucky if you get the 6, and you're not going to go in as strong as you did a year ago. That's kind of what it looks like from here. But on the flip side of that, I mean, there are a lot of positive signs. Again, the fact that they were able to recover and have this type of stretch says that that there is still something to them. They can be dangerous. They can summon the kind of performance that can beat Boston, and that's a big deal. But how. What level of consistency can they really hope to maintain, hope to sustain? I don't know. I mean, again, like do I think they'll go over 500 from this point for the rest of the year? Yeah. Do I think they'll end up with a safely above 500 record when it's over? I do. Are they going to win 70% of their games for the rest of the year? I don't think so.
Most important question, is the ecosystem fragile, or is Andrew Nembhard just the best player in the NBA?
Andrew Nembhard is just the best player in the NBA, obviously.
It's been crazy. I mean, now it is. I agree 100% with what you said in terms of like you have those 4 guys. That's obviously these other guys are important, but you have those 4 guys. You should win these games. So we all agree on that. On the other hand, Nembhard is exactly what they need. You have a Mathurin Haliburton backcourt does not play defense. McConnell is very good at certain things on defense, but he has his limits. And that's what Nembhard does. Not only does Nembhard play guard defense, he can play it against other bigger perimeter players.
Yeah.
He's just we've talked about this. Everyone knows this. He's just a nice fit in that he doesn't need the ball a ton, but he can handle the ball. You can give him the ball. He's going to score 12, 13, 14, 15 points a game. He's going to have 4, 5, 6, 7 assists, and then he's going to play great defense. Just talking about the difference that he makes that seems outsized from what his statistics are.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was kind of fun, fascinating thing to kind of experience in Boston for, 2 games over 3 days. When you're seeing, I've got to know certainly a few of the, other reporters of the Celtics guys, basically the guys that are on the Celtics beat, or at least operate out of Boston. Jared Weiss out of The Athletic is taking on a national role with them, but was kind of on their Celtics beat and lives in Boston. So I saw him. I saw, Jay King, Gary Washburn, Kerry Thompson, a bunch, Bobby Manning, a bunch of these guys that are Celtics, Adam Himmelsbach, a bunch of Celtics beat guys. And a couple of them were like, I kind of mentioned before when I knew Nembhard was out, like this is going to be a problem. Like they're going to have an issue. And, like I was like, it's not going to be as bad the next game. And they're like, wow, you were right. and they were like, wow, that's dramatic. Like, how is that big of a deal? And, just like obviously all the players, Jared Weiss was in there for the post game, and hearing, Miles Turner and Haliburton, talk about Drew, they were like, you guys don't get how big of a deal he is. You guys don't get how many things he does well. Ricardo obviously said the same thing, and how much he makes all the other pieces fit together. Like shameless plug. I felt good about our preseason, profile on him, because I mean that is the basketball player that Claude Nembhard raised. Is for somebody that will just fit and do whatever you need to do, and not be high maintenance, not have to be this guy, not have to be the guy that scores all the points. And just be willing to fit whatever, just fit into whatever hole is necessary, and take care of all of those issues. And he does that remarkably well. I mean, I think it is a big reason why you saw Haliburton get to the rim so much last night. I mean, like they have really constructed a lot of his offense, Haliburton's offense, around having Nembhard there to facilitate and make it so that Haliburton gets the opportunity to run around off the ball and then catch the ball when he's coming downhill. Basically, rather than being kind of teed up early in a possession, or even if he is teed up early in a possession, if he even bring the ball up, he can give it to Nembhard and then go run around. And I thought the play that I led with in today's story was talking about that layup he gets right after Tatum's and one. He was bound and determined to get to the rim, but that play doesn't work if Nembhard isn't there. And Nembhard barely does anything, but he's just there. Like Haliburton tries to drive around the screen on Turner. Like they don't make any contact there. Brown and kind of Tatum kind of close off, and then Haliburton backs it back around. Goes to his left, goes around the court basically. He finally gets the screen there. Turner gets Brown to switch, and Horford gets on him, and like Haliburton passes to Walker. Walker gives it to Nembhard. And so like Haliburton basically just sort of takes a dribble handoff from Nembhard, and then he gets Tatum on a switch, but he's got Tatum basically one-on-one. Brown's not there anymore. White's not really part of the play. I can't remember White was on the floor, but Haliburton blows by him. And it's just having Nembhard there to kind of direct traffic and just be there for kind of a smooth little dribble handoff that allows Haliburton to be coming downhill with momentum when he gets the ball and get a switch. Was a huge deal to creating that bucket. And that bucket starts a really quick 7-0 run, which turns into like a 13-0 run, changes the game. Place was coming down on their heads, but like Haliburton using Nembhard that way, Nembhard knowing how to tee him up, that stuff matters. And then Nembhard has a whole bunch of big buckets himself. He's just such a steady scorer in terms of how he gets to his shots, how he gets to the rim, his ability to get downhill. He just makes all of these pieces fit together. And defensively, I mean, he was on Tatum. Like Tatum's a guy that he's given 4 or 5 inches to. And, but he's still their most physical guy on the ball. And he's the guy that's going to say, hey, you want to try to body me, go ahead, but I'm not going to make it easy on you. And Tatum settled for a lot of threes. And, there was a period where he was hitting them and getting a bunch of buckets that way and starting to get him back into it. But, he didn't have a great night. He had a pretty inefficient night. I mean, like Jaylen Brown's been killing these guys, but, all the same, like they at least if you can make it hard on one of them, you got a shot, like one of them can't kill you all by himself. Like they need both of those guys to get going, or have somebody else, whether it's White or Holiday or Porzingis or something like that. And obviously Holiday and Porzingis were out. So, I mean, the math works in that case because Nembhard was able to really make Tatum's life harder so they could sustain 31 from Jaylen Brown and still be there. So just everything he does. And I also think he raises everybody's level. This is a little bit less like tangible, but I mean, it does seem to me that Benedict Mathurin plays harder when Nembhard's out there. I mean, it's a little bit better, assignment in that case too, but it does seem like you see a little bit tougher Benedict Mathurin when Andrew Nembhard is setting the standard as opposed to Quentin Jackson. Like again, you got to give all the credit in the world to Quentin Jackson for fighting as hard as he did as a two-way guy that had to start 5, 6, 7 games as a shooting guard next to Tyrese Haliburton. But I mean, he's not Aaron Nembhard. And I do think, Mathurin's had some good defensive games. I mean, he hasn't had a big scoring game in a while, but I think he's defended pretty well, actually. And so, I mean, I think when Nembhard's out there, like Mathurin has a sense of like, okay, I better dial it up. I thought Jarris Walker defended really well. I think there's something there to, even somebody like him seeing, somebody set the standard. And even hard as a guy like McConnell plays, I think, again, like there is a limitation there. When Nembhard's there doing it, I think everybody kind of looks around and says, well, I have to up my level and I have to play at that level defensively and bring a level of physicality. Their entire edge and presence and force, which is Rick Carlisle's probably 3 favorite words, is a lot better, when Nembhard's out there. So it's again, you don't want to excuse everything they've done in games that he hasn't been a part of, but you can't downplay how big of a deal he's been.
And we can wrap it up with a little more Tyrese Haliburton talk. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander scores 45 on them. Brown scored 44 the next night. We briefly I looked up the numbers, and it's just really, not that this is a surprise, it's really hard to be a consistently successful year-over-year NBA team without a top 10 player.
Right.
And, Tyrese Haliburton, to me, the Oklahoma City game was a little tricky in that clearly they were trying to take him out of it.
Sure.
Maybe it's worse if he forces it. So yeah. I don't want this to be seen as, boy, he really let him down in that game. But, he does not play great. He does not have a big game statistically against Oklahoma City. The first game against the Celtics, same thing, although I thought he was a little bit – I mean, no one played well, but it seemed like he was more part of the problem than not that night. But then, obviously, a great game last night. Does he need to play at – he's not going to be a top 10 NBA player, I don't think. Does he need to be a top 15 player, a top 20 player? Is he? Because he's not an all-star. If you're picking an all-star right now, Haliburton's not on the all-star team. Does he need to get back to that level for them to reach their full potential, or however you want to frame the question?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is obviously yes. In terms of and there's kind of a this year question versus a long-term question. And I think I do think when you see a guy like Gilgeous-Alexander get the shots that he gets and put a team on his back like he does, I think that puts into pretty sharp relief what Haliburton's missing, and what, if he wants to be in that echelon, what's necessary. And to me, what's necessary is he needs a physical transformation. He needs to be able to reach the point where he's a guy that hell or high water, he can get you 30 if he needs to. And he's not that, and the reason he's not that is because he's not physically built to just get in the paint and just create a couple feet of space for an 8-foot jumper anytime he wants to get it. Jalen Brunson can do that. Shai can do that. Luka can do that. Kyrie Irving can do that. If you need to be able to just put a team on a guard's back, that guy has to be able to physically will himself to 30 points a night if he feels like you need to have it. And the reason Haliburton doesn't have that gear is because he's not able to just body people. He's not able to just bounce off people. And you saw that a ton, obviously in the Knicks series when Brunson was doing that time after time after time. Maxine's got thoughts about this matter, as you can tell. But, that's how Brunson goes and gets 55 the other night. And so you don't see those kind of nights from Haliburton because he has a hard time doing that. And that's why it was such a big deal that he got to the rim as much as he did, last night. I mean, 10 of his 11 buckets were twos. At least I think 9 of those are in the paint. That's a big deal. You don't see that from him very often. And some of that was, a lot of that was him playing, smart basketball. He saw, matchup deals, obviously with Holiday off the floor, with Porzingis off the floor. There was a lot more situations where he was getting Al Horford switched on to him. And basically he was, it was kind of some elderly abuse right there. It was just saying, all right, I'm going to take you 38-year-old man. And just, you can't stay ahead of me. And he can't, time and time again, he got in that switch and made the most of it. And, even Tatum wasn't a lot better, when he got in those switches. It was just, the guys that he rarely tried to drive on Jaylen Brown. He was able to get around Derek White a couple times. Obviously part of it, there are shots there more frequently than he gives himself credit for. And what I mean by that is there are times when I think he's getting downhill where he can put up a floater, or he can go to the rim and finish through somebody, and he doesn't, because he sees an open shooter in the corner, and textbook says that's the right call. That's the right decision. Is that guy's open, you got to go through a body, like you should tee your teammate up for a three. It's better to get your teammates involved. That's the right point guard move to make. I think if you watch it on film, I don't think you'll see too many where you're like, Ty, that's dumb. That's stupid. But there are times where it's like, you could have had that one. And, if it led to a missed three, you're like, there were 2 points on the board that you might have been able to have, and I think he made more of a point in this last game to do it and get all the way to the rim. And I think, if he has put some more balance to his shot profile, there are more points there, and there are more buckets there, and there are more assists there. I think I didn't even realize until I was digging the numbers last night, he was at 60.7% 3-point attempts. Like, basically out of his total field goal attempts, 60.7% were threes. That's a career high by a significant margin. This is the second year that he's taken more threes than twos. There's at the end of the day, there's a lot of settling there. And I think he'd only 8% of his shots were within 3 feet. He is not getting a lot of layups, and there is something to be said for, okay, is that a physical thing? Is he's not as explosive? And that's possible. Certainly he's dealing with more defense. That makes a lot of sense, but I do think there's more opportunity for him to get downhill. And I do think that, this game kind of showed him that he has more opportunity to do that. Now, again, is he always going to have that kind of matchup scenario they can take advantage of? No, he's not going to get to the rim that much. But if he plays closer to the level that he did, they can obviously get a lot better. And certainly he can get back to all-star potential, all-star caliber play. But to be a top 10 guy, to be a top 5 guy, I think he needs to make a physical transformation. I think, and I think he needs a summer where he gets to spend a lot of time in the weight room. Obviously, it was tough for him to do that the last few years when he had international basketball responsibilities. Certainly also had the contract deal to deal with. I don't think he lifted as much as he thought he would, or kind of expected to, as he kind of waited to make sure that, he got to put pen to paper on that, 250 or whatever it is, $45 million deal, which I get. You don't exactly need to throw your arm out right before someone's going to pay you enough to buy a small island. But this, I think he finally, presuming he gets to it healthy, he really could, and he's not going to have any basketball responsibilities from whenever this season ends till next season. And so it's at some point he's got to just get bigger and get stronger and get more muscular, because if he wants to be a top 10 guy, he has to be able to create that gear for himself. Again, I get systematically he's going to want to pass, he's going to want to move the ball around, but he's got to be able to create that gear for himself. You don't want him to get slower, but just want to have enough muscle to withstand that kind of contact, finish through contact, become that type of player. And then at that point, obviously, I think the Pacers can make a bigger leap. But he needs to be playing closer to this level if this team is going to get where it needs to get. Certainly they've got another guy like Siakam that you could say, is a top 30 guy, somewhere in that range. And I think we're underrating, frankly. I mean, he has been really, really consistent. There's a lot of things he does phenomenally well. But, so they have someone else they could rely on to be a go get you a bucket and ISO situation. But I think Haliburton also needs to be a guy of that caliber, long-term for them to be where they want to be. So he has to. Bottom line is, yes, he has to play better. There's a ceiling on that this year, but, on a long-term, if they're going to win a championship, yes, I think he has to be a top 10 player.
All right, that is it for the latest From Way Downtown Pacers podcast. Please go to IndyStar.com. Follow all of Dustin's work. Thank you for watching.